Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us for another Saturday edition. Some more bonus content for you this week talking about rural crime. Well, I kind of alluded on our Tuesday episode, to the fact that for the next couple rural crime episodes, I was hoping to have some guests on this episode, which we have not done before, and that has come to fruition. And I am very excited about this. So, as you all know, I have been postulating about the Second Amendment in the United States as compared to the United Kingdom, and then the rates of rural crime I've been seeing in the United Kingdom in terms of the stories that come into my inbox through Google Alerts compared to what I see in the United States. And I had my own theory, but I'm not willing to just come up with my own theory and just conclude that it is correct. And so I took a step and I reached out, and we are very, very fortunate today to have a gentleman on the show, Philip Clarke, who is the executive editor of Farmers Weekly, is going to come on and talk with us about rural crime in the United Kingdom. Very generous in donating his time to be able to do this today, especially considering our time difference from Idaho all the way to London. And he's going to come on and talk to us about this and offer some reasons why they see high rates. Well, first of all, I'm going to ask him if there truly is a problem with rural crime in the United Kingdom, or if I'm just misreading this based on the articles I'm seeing. And then, spoiler alert, I'm going to ask him what are the causes. And he's got a very interesting answer, and I will tell you by the conclusion of this interview, I don't think my theory about the Second Amendment is nearly as strong as I originally did. So in this interview, by the way, is not all, matter of fact, we barely touch on the Second Amendment, but that is kind of what, I don't know, that's kind of what motivated me to want to reach out and to speak with Philip and to get things from a first-hand perspective coming out of the United Kingdom. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting information in here, and since I'm reporting on rural crime stories every week from the United Kingdom, man, it is my pleasure to welcome Philip Clarke to the show and to give you all a very unique perspective on how this all works in other parts of the world as well. So let's get that started for you right now. Well, Philip, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
Hey, it is a pleasure for me. So just to preface this a little bit, I have been profiling these different rural crime stories for my audience from, I do Google alerts, and that's how I find these stories that pop up on rural crime, and I see a lot that come out of the United Kingdom, and so I've started talking about them on my show, and I wanted to speak with an expert. I wanted to speak with somebody who is there who can kind of explain some of the terminology to all of us, and talk to me about why we see so many stories as compared to what we see here in the U.S. I've got my theories about that, but I thought it would be great to talk to somebody who's actually over there. So I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I'm happy to help, and let's give it a go.
Okay. Well, so my first question for you is just tell us a little bit about you. What do you do, and what is your history, and where are you located?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm the executive editor at Farmers Weekly, which is the #1 magazine for farming and agricultural industry in the UK. We have a few overseas readers, I think some in the States, but primarily UK focused. My main role there is overseeing news and business. The news stories, business content, and I do the leader writing and looking after the opinion section as well. So it's fairly broad ranging, but mostly I'm sort of interested in the policy side of things, as well as the business side of things.
Okay. And where are you located? Where is your headquarters?
Okay. Normally we're just in the south of London, so down in the southeast. But since March the 23rd, which is the date that lockdown started here, I've been pretty much working at the bottom of my garden for 6 months.
Okay.
So I did my first farm visit about a week ago, going out to see some sheep producers who are selling their own lamb direct to consumers.
Okay.
But pretty much I've been home based for a long time.
All right.
And going slowly stir crazy in my garden office.
Yes, we understand stir crazy. Although those of us, so we have a small farm here in Idaho. Having a farm has been a blessing during the lockdowns and everything, just because I can get out and I can walk around, I can work, I can be outside. So having a farm has been, I guess, if you have to go through a lockdown like this, it's been nice. But, okay, so help me straighten something out. I feel whenever I'm talking about these stories and I'm looking at stories coming in from these different areas in the United Kingdom, I feel pretty ignorant. So can you help me, and you'll probably laugh at me for this question, but help me understand the difference between the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and England?
Oh, wow. Okay, the United Kingdom is 4 countries. Okay. So England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Great Britain is 3 countries, so the same but without Northern Ireland. So Wales, Scotland, and England would be Great Britain. Northern Ireland, obviously, separate. And what was the other one? England. England is England.
England is England. That's one of those. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so Northern Ireland. So is there a Southern Ireland?
Of course, yeah. There's the Republic of Ireland.
Okay.
With a long history. I mean, one of the things about having the United Kingdom, and in recent years, more political power has been devolved to each of the 4 regions. So whereas in the past we may have done a story that would have affected the UK as a whole, now everything tends to be slightly different. I guess it's similar in the States with federal policy and state legislature.
Okay.
But it makes life a lot more complicated when you're having to just deal with little nuances between the 4 different parts of the UK. Farmers Weekly is, tends to be a bit England-centric.
Okay.
But we do try and keep an eye on what's going on in the devolved regions as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting as you talk about Ireland and you say there's some history there. I mean, that's obviously an understatement. There's a lot of history there. Of course, when I was a kid in the 1980s, hearing about it all the time. But when I was a police officer for 15 years here in the States, and for 5 years of that, I was a detective, and I was on a training. I had been sent out to Boston, Massachusetts on a training. And so while I was there, because I focused on domestic violence back then, I did a job shadow with a domestic violence detective in a family justice center in Boston for the Boston Police Department. And there was a group of police officers there for a separate tour/training from Ireland who I got to meet, and we got to talk about law enforcement and the differences between the U.S. and Ireland. And they had some unbelievable stories regarding that history that had gone on. It was very interesting to speak with them.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, and likewise, I was kind of growing up during the worst of those troubles. When I was at university, there were bombs going off in Manchester, London, different cities in the GB mainland related to those troubles. You kind of just got on with life and got used to it. But to think that was happening on your doorstep, it was quite something, really.
Yeah,
it's a big improvement since then.
Yeah.
And obviously now with the Brexit thing going on, there's still huge issues around how agricultural trade is treated between GB and Northern Ireland, when Northern Ireland has a border with the Republic of Ireland, which is part of the European Union. So there's still massive issues that have got to be resolved there.
Yeah.
And it's a very hot political subject at the moment.
Okay. Well, how did you get involved in working for an agricultural publication? Do you have an agricultural, farming background?
Okay, yeah, my degree from university was in agricultural economics. And with that, I then went to work for the National Farmers Union, which is our main farm lobby, and was involved in the dairy side of things there. But from there, actually, my sister was working for the BBC, dealing with policy in Westminster, government policy, and I kind of thought, she's got a pretty interesting life. So I made the move from the farm union side of things into agricultural journalism, and seemed to have stuck there for a rather long time.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I see, coming back to rural crime, and I keep trying to talk about what I'm reading about going on in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, and and I want to make sure I'm getting it right. I want to be, I don't want to be passing along misinformation to my listeners or anything like that. But it seems to me, now, just anecdotally looking at articles that pop up, and again, I'm just using Google Alerts for this, but I've got all sorts of different terms put in Google Alerts, and consistently, about 8 out of 10 stories I receive are coming from the United Kingdom as opposed to the United States, with a sprinkling in there of a story from Canada, a story from Australia, or something like that. So my first question is there a huge rural crime problem in the United Kingdom?
I would say that there is. If you ask a group of farmers what's the biggest thing that's concerning them at the moment, and you might expect them to say Brexit or the price of wheat or whatever, almost inevitably they'll say rural crime is one of their very top concerns. And yeah, the anecdotal stories you talk about bear that out, as do the hard statistics. There's our main insurance company here is called the NFU Mutual. They produce an annual report on crime, and this year's report showed another 10% increase. They base the figures on claims made, and obviously there'll be a lot of rural crime where farmers don't put in an insurance claim. They either feel it's not worth it, or they may not even they may not have the cover. But just based on insurance claims to our number one insurer, they estimate that rural crime's worth over £50 million in the last 12 months, which is a 10% increase on the year before, which is probably a 10% increase on the year before that. The report also sort of breaks down geographically where most of the crime's happening, but also by type of crime. And so vehicle theft is a big one. Quad bikes, do you call them quad bikes or ATVs in the States?
ATVs is what we call them.
ATVs, okay. Yeah, I mean, ATVs, hugely popular with the criminal fraternity, easy to steal, often don't have registration plates, so easy to change identity. So that, we report on that almost weekly. Tractor theft, that's up 25% in the last year. That particularly seems to be driven by organized crime and a lot of overseas demand. So those tractors, they go missing, and within 24 hours, they're probably out of the country,
really,
on the back of a lorry going off to Eastern Europe somewhere. The other thing that we're seeing an awful lot of now is GPS systems, and farmers merrily leave their tractors out in the field overnight or in the farmyard overnight with a £15,000 GPS dome sitting on top, and the next morning it's gone. And even contractors, we may have a fleet of 10 of these things. We've seen a lot of those just disappearing. It's professional crime done to order, and away they go.
Okay, that is fascinating, and that you're talking about the GPS systems. I've been reading about that and thinking to myself, well, my goodness, we're using the same systems over here in the United States. And then I was reading there's some new technology they've been recommending in the United Kingdom where they can put little trackers and things like this on the GPS. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. I mean, some of the newer ones have a kind of PIN code system where you can deactivate it, which reduces its value, obviously. And some farmers have invested in tracking devices as well. And we reported on a story just a couple of weeks ago where I think it was taken off a sprayer, but the farmer phoned the police. The police weren't interested. They got more important things to deal with. But then using his tracker, he located it in the city of Birmingham, went in there with a few of his friends and found a guy with a white van with 10 of these devices in the back. And the guy was from Eastern Europe, got arrested, then did a runner, never seen again, but at least they got their kit back on that occasion. So yeah, farmers are, taking action to try and protect themselves where they can.
Yeah, I reported on that story on my show. So I read that story and talked about that. And I was thrilled, by the way, that the farmers did take action and they did something to protect themselves. I mean, that, at least from an American standpoint, that's a very American thing. We like that, go out and take care of business and and do something on our own as well. But I've been fascinated by watching this. So why do you think it is? I mean, why is rural crime going up, and what are the postulations on why there's such a problem with it there?
Okay. I think it probably varies between the different type of crime we're talking about. But as I mentioned, the things like tractors, which are quite difficult to steal, that's organized crime driven by overseas demand. But one of the other things we see quite a bit of is theft of livestock. So we have sheep rustling again on the increase. There's a lot of basic economics that come into that. A sheep, the price of sheep is pretty strong at the moment, so they've got a good value. They're pretty easy to steal. Well, fairly easy to steal. I think if you got a trailer and hopefully possibly even a dog that can round them up, they do run around a bit, but they're out in the fields. People can steal them without too much difficulty. And then there's a demand for them in the cities. There's a black market in sheep meat. There are underground abattoirs that will process them. So yeah, it's kind of driven by economics and convenience, I guess. I mean, somebody said to me that now that tractors are more difficult to steal, then let's steal some sheep instead. So there's that. The sheep are just worth good money at the moment, and some may go missing. So it's I've got this.
That's
unusual.
Yeah, I've got this image in my mind of farmers being part of this tight-knit community and really supporting each other, but it doesn't always go that way. Obviously, people that are stealing sheep, they have to have acquired the skills and the knowledge of how to use the equipment, the dogs, and how to round up sheep somewhere. So they've probably worked in agriculture or done something around these livestock.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Now, the equipment and the GPS systems, and that's all heading straight to Eastern Europe. Is that right?
Seems to be the case. Again, we hear stories of the equipment being put for sale up on eBay, but when we've looked into that, it's kind of been a dead end story. So yeah, I think most of the demand is from overseas and from Eastern Europe in particular.
Now, it's interesting. We've got a black market of butchering and slaughtering animals here in the U.S. as well, but it has to do with our regulations through the USDA, or the United States Department of Agriculture, which says if you're going to sell retail cuts of meat, they have to be butchered in a facility where we've got an inspector from the USDA who's on site the entire time, and they're monitoring everything that goes on. And so that limits the facilities where you can have animals that are butchered that you can sell retail meats of that animal later. And we've got a large refugee population here in the U.S., particularly where I live. We have a large refugee population, and they want to eat goat and they want to eat sheep, and they don't have the ability to buy, a whole goat or something like that. They don't have the land or the facilities to be able to slaughter or butcher it on themselves, by themselves, which would be legal. And so they have to go out and buy it. And then, of course, if they're Muslim, then it has to be done in a specific way, so it fulfills their obligations from their religion. And so it puts them kind of in a bind, and it creates a system for a black market here, because there is no quote unquote legal way for them to fulfill what they need to get or what they want to get. That's what I see driving our black market when it comes to butchering animals here in the U.S., at least in my geographic region. Where you're at, is it the same as that, or is it to get reduced prices on purchasing meat, or something entirely different?
I would think the latter, to do with price. I mean, obviously our bona fide abattoirs are highly regulated. Same situation with meat inspectors. Everything is controlled and done properly. There are also halal abattoirs, which will legally do the slaughter for the Muslim community. Ditto kosher product as well for the Jewish community. So, the vast majority is all done above board with all the controls and regulations that you describe. So really, the bits that we're talking about, and don't want it to sound like it's a massive thing. It's a very minority activity, but it's driven by price. You can sell it higher, buy it lower on the black market. We had stories last year of sheep actually being butchered in fields. I mean, that was just devastating for the farmers to come and get up in the morning and go down to check their feet and sleep and go down to check their sheep and just find a few blood and fleeces remaining and the rest of the carcass gone. It's pretty grisly stuff, and that obviously would then just go into the black market for whoever is prepared to take the risk of buying it. There's obviously a food safety risk. You don't know what treatment or what pharmaceutical drugs the animals may have had before they were slaughtered, any disease issues you don't know about. So it's obviously a risk there, but it's driven by economics, I'm sure.
So driven by price. That's interesting because I'm sure in larger communities, larger cities around the U.S., we do have the butchering facilities that will serve those markets, so it can be done halal and all of that. But right here where I'm at, we don't. But we've got this strong demand, so I know that's going on. So that's interesting, and I would assume through the free markets here, eventually we will, as long as the demand gets high enough, we'll develop a business that can serve that market. That's very interesting. Okay, a couple terms I keep talking about. Fly tipping. Is that dumping your garbage on people's land?
It is indeed.
Okay.
Yep. And again, that is a massive problem. We talked about crime so far involving theft, but fly tipping would be right up there as one of the biggest concerns that farmers have. And it's been getting worse and worse and worse. During coronavirus, during lockdown, a lot of the amenity tips were closed anyway, and so that caused a big spike in it. But also increasingly, amenity tips now charge to take commercial waste, whereas it used to be just turn up and put it in the tip. You now get charged for it, so people are more inclined just to dump it. So on my regular drive to work that I used to do, it's not unusual to pass 2 or 3 or 4 places where people are coming along with trucks or tippers and just dumped a whole load of building rubble on the side of the road, sometimes in the road, but more often than not on farmland, on private farmland. And the issue there for the farmer is that if it's on private land, then it's the farmer's responsibility and cost to clear it up. If it's on a road, the local government, local council has to deal with it. But most of these incidents happen on private farmland, some on a colossal scale. Some of the industrial waste we've seen where 20 tons, 30 tons has been dumped in huge quantities and of processed rubbish, processed waste. And it's the farmer's cost. And if there's a pollution incident that gets associated with it, then it's the farmer's responsibility as well. So, that's a big area where there's a lot of pressure coming from the unions to try and change it and update the law. But so far, they've not got very far.
And this is driven by economics as well. It's just so expensive for them. Go ahead.
Economics and maybe laziness. But,
okay.
But occasionally, we occasionally find people get caught in the act. More farmers are putting discreet CCTV cameras in their hedgerows. And every now and again, we get videos of people catching maybe just a guy with a car with a bootload of black bags, dumping them, or sometimes more serious commercial scale. It's basically either people can't be bothered to go to the tip, or they know that they're going to have to pay to get rid of their waste. So just go out under cover of darkness and stick it in a field somewhere.
Okay. And then another term is hair coursing. I think I defined that one and found that last week, but that's the sport of having dogs chase a rabbit and seeing who can turn the dog. Is that correct? Or turn the rabbit?
That's right. It's hares rather than rabbits, but
sorry,
they're fast. They're faster. More of a challenge for the greyhound, but it's particularly associated with the traveller community, for whom it's a big sport, big pastime, and a lot of money changes hands. It's a betting thing, and at this time of year, particularly now, the fields have been cleared of wheat and barley, just the stubble remaining or newly ploughed field. They're driving on. It's an issue of trespassing. And it's an issue of damage to, if there's newly sown crops, can be damage to the fields. And when farmers have tried to intervene, some of these guys are pretty unsavory characters, and there's damage to the farmer as well.
Okay.
We've reported on more than one occasion of farmers that got beaten up trying to intervene. So the police advice is phone the police, don't try and get involved yourself.
Okay.
Hair coursing is another big problem.
Okay. And then I also keep reading about dog attacks on sheep, and I have not been able to, through all the articles I've read, I haven't been able to ascertain if this is being done on purpose for sport or if it's just people who are being irresponsible with their dogs and they're out on a walk or something like that.
It's certainly not done for sport. It's certainly people being irresponsible. A lot of it is actually where people go off to work and they just leave their dog in the back garden thinking, well, it'll be better than keeping it in the house. Mm-hmm. When they come back, the dog's still in the back garden. They don't realize that during the course of the day, while they've been at work, the dog's gone off with a couple of his mates and gone out, and they can cause horrendous damage. Quite frequently, is people just out on a dog walk, don't put the dogs on a leash and think that their dog wouldn't do anything like that. And the next thing they know, off it's gone and is chasing sheep out of control. It's both of those things. We just report on it all the time, and it's horrendous again for the farmers that are affected. I think the worst one I reported on a couple of years ago was where a couple of dogs had driven a flock of 116 or 120 pregnant ewes into a corner, and the ewes had basically suffocated. So they hadn't been killed by having their throats ripped out. They've been killed by crushing themselves in a state of blind panic. Obviously all pregnant ewes as well, so the lambs were lost as well. So it's a big problem.
Yeah, well, I keep reading about it, so obviously it is. Okay, so so going on and moving on in looking at it from the perspective of where you're at, and looking at it from the United States perspective, I'm always curious about I don't know what, I guess why is it such a large problem in the United Kingdom? Is it proximity to urban centers? Are your farmers just all so much closer to urban centers than we are here in the United States?
I think as a generalization that's true. I mean, England, Great Britain is a pretty crowded island. Yes, you can find places in Scotland where you get a bit of remoteness, but generally, it's a lot more population density here. And unsurprisingly, the real crime hotspots, be it in the southeast of England or in the Midlands, tend to be linked in with the main urban areas. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of it is to do with that. People coming out. I mean, one thing we've seen is as police have clamped down on crime in urban areas, the criminals have decided that they're going to move out further and exploit the situation in the rural areas. Also, in some of these things we've talked about in terms of ATV theft or livestock theft, the market's on the doorstep because that's just a few miles down the road, mm-hmm. back in the cities or in the towns. So I think the bulk of it is driven by the fact that we're a much more crowded place, and with more interaction between rural and urban areas.
That's interesting to me, just in the sense that what I'm familiar with living in the United States is that the farmland that is closer to urban areas tends to be our smaller farms. It's when you get really far out that you see our larger farms, and on the smaller farms, and I'm talking in acres, we're talking 10 to 25 to 50 acres, maybe 100 acres or something like that, where you have neighbors close enough by that if somebody who doesn't belong in the area. And I say belong, meaning they don't live in the area. They're not known to the local residents. If they've got a car parked on the side of the road, if they're driving around and looking at stuff, if they're going onto people's property, there's a really strong likelihood that somebody will call the police or go up and confront them themselves. Is that different? Is it easier to be concealed where you're at? Like, I live in the West. We don't have a lot of trees, so you can see for a long distance. I'm assuming where you're at, maybe that's different. What do you think the difference is there?
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, I live in a village. It's called a village. There's 7,000 people here, and I can walk up or down the street and not know a soul. It's so out in the countryside, much the same. There's a lot of people that move into the countryside from London or from Birmingham or wherever. They don't integrate necessarily with the farming community, so they're still fairly separate. But there's still a lot of people buzzing around that going about their daily business quite innocently. Mm-hmm. So it's not a case of everybody knows everybody else. It's a case of there's an awful lot of people, mostly up to no harm at all, that you've never seen before in your life.
Okay, now I've got another question. A few weeks back, I read a story, and it was a rural crime story. It was out of the United Kingdom. And I apologize, I'm not familiar with your political structures on the local level and all the different ranks, and so I don't remember the title of the person who suggested this, but it was somebody in a position of authority in the local government was suggesting that farmers take a patrol around their property at like 3 a.m. to try and dissuade people from coming on in the middle of the night, committing thefts, doing things like that. And basically, I think what he was suggesting was if you do a patrol every night around 3 a.m, A, you might catch somebody in the act. B, if somebody is watching your place and preparing to do a theft, they'll see that you're out and about checking things, and therefore maybe they'll move on. They won't choose your location. And I found that to be an interesting suggestion by this individual, because my question was, well, okay, if you're doing a patrol at 3 a.m. and you walk around the backside of your barn or whatever that may be, and you catch somebody or 2 or 3 people who are out there committing a theft, now what? And so, that I wanted to ask you about that. Are you familiar with the story I'm talking about, or any advice like that that's been given out in the United Kingdom?
I'm not familiar with that specific story.
Okay.
I'd say that farmers have been encouraged and have set up a lot of their own groups. They have neighbourhood watch schemes, rural watch schemes, particularly using WhatsApp. So if they see anybody who looks like they're going to do some hare coursing, then on the WhatsApp group, they can inform other local farmers.
Okay.
I'm not aware of farmers getting up at 3 a.m. to do a patrol. I think it's probably about the one time that they're getting a bit of well-earned rest.
Yeah.
But we do see farmers taking a lot more provision now. So a lot more tractors left blocking gates, or machinery left blocking gates, padlocks on gates, CCTV around farmyards, automatic lighting around farmyards. So a lot more of that sort of thing. One thing that's been happening quite recently is people, it sounds kind of medieval, but they're kind of digging ditches around the perimeter just to stop people getting onto the land so easily, which by all accounts is pretty effective. So those that have done it have reported good success.
So people just cannot drive onto their properties because they can't drive across the ditch? Is that how it's working?
Correct. It's basic, but sometimes the simplest things are the best.
Who would have thought we would have gone back to that? Are there any drawbridges going in?
not that I've seen.
Okay.
If there were, they'd have padlocks on them.
All right. So one last question I had for you, and this is just another one of these theories I've had as I've been reading all of this, is of course here in the United States we have the Second Amendment and we've got this gun culture, right? And so there's a perception here that's not true, that landowners can shoot people for trespassing on their properties. And it's not true, but it's a perception, I think, that helps to control crime. And there's a perception that our rural people are heavily armed with firearms and they're willing to use them. And I wonder how that differs, or if it differs at all from the United Kingdom in terms of your laws and what people can do there in terms of self-defense and protection of property and things like that.
Okay, well, clearly there's a big difference
Yeah.
there. And whilst I'd say that most farmers would have a shotgun on the premises, I mean, shooting is one of the sort of pastimes, the most popular pastimes that they would list. There's certainly no kind of cultural expectation that anyone would ever actually take up firearms to defend their property.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an extremely rare occurrence. There actually was a case looking back about 20 years ago where a Norfolk farmer shot two intruders, both teenagers, and killed one of them. And he ended up, it was a very, very high profile case, and he served jail time for that, in my opinion, quite justifiably. So, I mean, the law does allow you to take reasonable force.
Mm-hmm.
You then ask, well, what is reasonable force? Well, that's for the courts to decide. But picking up a gun and shooting somebody is clearly overstepping the mark by a big margin. Farmers understand that. I don't know if it's the same in the States. I mean, we had one shooting incident again many years ago, which led to a change in the law just with regards to shotguns. And now shotguns have to be kept in a steel cabinet bolted to a wall or floor. So the guns just aren't that readily available. If someone was to come into the house in the middle of the night, in reality, you wouldn't really have time to go and start looking for your key to unlock your cabinet to get your gun out. So it's pretty, the licensing laws are very strict.
Mm-hmm.
And the police do check that those are being adhered to. So I don't think either from the criminal's point of view or from the farmer's point of view, gun culture really comes into it.
Well, and that's just one of the things I had thought about. And by the way, to shoot and kill somebody in the United States to protect or keep them from stealing property is also not considered reasonable. But we have this perception that it is. And after serving all the time I did as a police officer, I do think that most of our criminals that are going to go onto farms are what we call rational choice offenders, where they're going to weigh the pros and they're going to weigh the cons, or the costs and the benefits of committing the crime. And if there's a perception that I'm going to get shot doing this, it seems to really raise the potential cost of doing that crime. And I just wondered if that might be a factor that's different between the two cultures, because our two cultures are extremely different when it comes to firearms, of course. And that could be a whole nother interview, but we're very different in that respect, and I didn't know if that would played into it or not. But I was curious, and I just wanted to get your perspective on that. But it was interesting to hear that farmers are going to have shotguns on their properties, but those are highly regulated, and the police can actually come into your home and make sure you're meeting all the requirements to keep a firearm on your property.
That certainly can happen. So yeah, I think going back to some of the early things we're talking about, it's more to do with the density of population. Mm-hmm. And the fact that probably who used to be urban criminals are now looking to the countryside as a softer target. Mm-hmm. That probably comes into it. Police resourcing is a big issue as well. Mm-hmm. That our police force, I'm sure it's the same with you, but our law enforcement is very constrained by budget. So, where the budget is allocated, it tends to be in areas of greatest population density. So, there's not a huge rural police force going around acting as a deterrent. It might, farmers might wish it would be.
Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff. Well, Philip, I have taken up a ton of your time. I cannot say thank you enough. Really, really do appreciate it. And thank you for the insight. I've been talking about this so much. I wanted to get the perspective of somebody with their feet on the ground there. I really do appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. So I hope it's been interesting and useful for your listeners.